The Swedish government is offering to pay immigrants $34,000 if they go back to their home country.
The salaries in the UK are often twice of what you get in Sweden.
And there is no part of me that wants to move back to Sweden. A summer house? Yes, please. But living there full time? No way.
Sweden, a country that for decades symbolized prosperity, stability, and the model welfare state. In quality of life rankings, it consistently shone at the top, drawing global attention with its innovative industry, low unemployment, and one of the highest levels of social trust. But today, that image is starting to crack. Dark clouds have gathered over Sweden, and this is no longer just a temporary economic slowdown. We're talking about figures the country hasn't seen in more than 30 years. Retail sales in Sweden have collapsed. In May, they fell by 4.8%. That's the steepest drop since 1994. As recently as April, we saw 1.5% growth, and a month later, the consumer market plunged into chaos. Worse, this decline isn't a one-off statistical blip. It's the result of a deeper problem that has been eating away at the Swedish economy for months. Industrial production? Down. Private consumption? Down. Even GDP, which until recently looked solid, fell by 0.2% month on month in May. Seemingly small, but at the scale of the entire economy, it's a blow that sends a clear signal. Something is seriously wrong.
First of all, I've lived outside of Sweden for more than 11 years now. First 4 years in London, then 3 in Berlin, and now another 4.5 in London. And there is no part of me that wants to move back to Sweden. A summer house? Yes, please. But living there full time? No way.
Sweden is building an entire new city out of wood and still clings to the ambitions of a modern economy, yet cracks are showing. So where do they come from? Today we're putting Sweden on the workbench for you. What is driving this crisis? What are the prevailing moods? And what comes next for Sweden? Whose economy matters enormously for Europe? Let's find out. Retail sales in May 2025 fell by as much as 4.8%, the biggest drop since 1994. Year on year, sales decreased by 1.8%, marking the first annual decline since August of last year. Durable goods were hit the hardest: furniture, electronics, renovation materials. That shows Swedes are cutting back on big-ticket purchases, a classic sign of anxiety about the future. The country's GDP fell by 0.2% in May compared with April, and according to the Statistical Office, the declines stem from weaker consumption and exports. The unemployment rate reached 9%, the highest in years. Back in 2022, it stood at 7.3%. The Riksbank cut rates to 2.00% in June and signaled more moves to come. But inflation in June again overshot forecasts. That spells a trap, recession alongside still elevated prices. The housing market is slowing too. Home prices fell by 7% year over year, and new home sales are at their lowest in a decade. For years, Sweden was seen as one of Europe's most successful economic models, a state that managed to combine free market dynamism with a comprehensive social system and investment in innovation. It was precisely this balance that created the conditions for the rise of global brands that reshaped world markets. IKEA became a symbol of functional design and mass-accessible furniture, changing forever how people furnish their homes. H&M dominated apparel with a global fast fashion network. Scania and Volvo built a reputation in automotive, becoming pillars of European transport. In new technology, companies like Spotify, which revolutionized how we listen to music, and Mojang, the creator of the cult hit Minecraft, one of the best-selling games in history, took center stage. The Swedish economy rested on three pillars: innovation, the export strength of industry, and a stable social system that guaranteed security while encouraging entrepreneurship. High-quality education, advanced technological infrastructure, and openness to foreign markets made the country not just a regional leader, but one of the most important economies in the European Union. A strong private sector with globally recognizable firms gave Sweden strategic weight, economically and reputationally. Where does Sweden's current stagnation come from? Economists point to several key causes. First, the erosion of household purchasing power. High inflation in recent years has clearly reduced real incomes, translating into weaker consumption. Second, rising financing costs. Although the Riksbank is cutting rates, many mortgages and corporate loans are still being repaid on terms set when rates were at their highest in a decade. Layered onto this is weakening exports, traditionally one of Sweden's growth engines. Global slowdown, especially in Europe, and softer demand in China are constraining companies like Volvo and Scania. Finally, the property market, long stable and profitable, is now undergoing a correction.
But Swedish salaries are pitiful when compared to the UK. Sure, it's more expensive to live in a city like London, and there's a long commute if you live outside of the big cities. But the salaries in the UK are often twice of what you get in Sweden. I still think that I prefer working in Sweden, but I have to admit that the salaries in the UK are much better than in Sweden.
On top of that, Sweden faces not only an economic crisis, but a social one. A country long held up as a paragon of stability, and the welfare state is now grappling with a sharp rise in anti-immigration sentiment and a fierce debate over integration. Growing support for the Sweden Democrats, who won over 20% of the vote in the last election and became the second largest force in parliament, is a clear sign of public frustration.
It is full. We don't have a welfare system that can support the migrants. We don't have any housing.
And I think more and more people are realizing that this is it's not feasible to take so many immigrants during a so short time period.
More and more Swedes blame mass migration for rising crime, pressure on the welfare system, and strains in the labor market. One of the most debated issues is the so-called no-go zones, areas described by Swedish police as particularly vulnerable, särskilt utsatta områden. The list currently includes 59 districts, including 27 at the highest risk level. They are found mainly in the big cities, Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö.
To jest najlepszy przykład getta, dlatego że jeżeli się mówi w ogóle w Szwecji, ludzie między sobą podają przykład jakiegoś getta, to mówią Rinkeby. Stare budownictwo jeszcze z lat 20-30.
Ale w Szwecji to jest standard getta.
To jest standard getta, tak. To nie są to żadne slumsy, tylko po prostu dzielnice, w których, powiedziałbym, jest nadmiar imigrantów. 90% w niektórych dzielnicach. Jest segregacja, czyli że oni czują się poza głównym nurtem życia w Szwecji. Dlatego, że tak, nie mają pracy, są zamknięci jak gdyby w takiej niby...
There's also Rosengård in Malmö, one of the districts most widely covered in the media, often portrayed as an epicenter of drug gangs. Then there are Biskopsgården and Angered, Gothenburg, areas plagued by gang violence and high unemployment. According to a 2023 police report, these districts have weak law enforcement capacity, gangs dominate, and residents often fear cooperating with the police. In some cases, emergency services, fire brigades, or ambulances require police escort to intervene safely. The employment rate in these areas averages 49%, compared with 67% nationwide, and poverty and crime are several times higher than the national average. These realities reinforce the belief among part of the public that the open door policy for refugees after 2015 was a mistake. Add to that a security crisis, gang wars, explosions, and shootings have become emblematic of a new reality in which, in many districts, first responders enter only under police protection. In 2024, there were 92 homicides, the lowest figure since 2014 when there were 87. The vast majority were linked to gun violence, 45 fatal shooting victims, down by 8 versus 2023. That means Sweden's annual gun homicide rate is around 4 per million inhabitants, while the European average is about 1.6 per million. Unfortunately, gang violence remains a serious problem. In the first half of 2025, there had already been 84 shootings, with 27 people killed, compared with 148 incidents and 18 fatalities in the same period of 2024. Lethality is rising, often attributed to the involvement of younger, less experienced perpetrators.
You could say I've done almost everything, from weapons offences to drugs crime.
What sort of violence have you seen being part of a gang?
I've seen people getting shot, I've seen people die, people getting hurt, mothers crying in despair. I've seen almost everything, but there's nothing you can do about it.
A child of migrant parents, by age 9, Adam was already moving drugs for gangs. He's been jailed 5 times. His name and voice have been changed. How do they recruit people?
In many different ways. For example, in schools or preschools, out on the street, the people who want to make money are often children.
The economic crisis, visible in the record drop in retail sales, rising unemployment, and weakening exports, has coincided with structural problems that have been building for years. High inflation and expensive credit are squeezing household purchasing power, while the state bears the enormous costs of integrating hundreds of thousands of immigrants, many of whom remain outside the labor market. Swedes remain among the wealthiest nations in Europe, and no one should doubt they will retain that wealth thanks to the footprint their homegrown firms have on the global market. Sweden's GDP per capita per resident is about $59,000, giving it a solid place in global rankings. That exceeds the European Union average by 34%, which stands at $44,000. Even so, something is going wrong with the Swedish economy. The question is whether this is temporary or a long-term phenomenon. We'll likely find out in the coming years. That's all from me for today. See you in the next episode. Take care.